Hello and welcome to Hey Ask Me Stuff, the show where you out there in the internet land get to ask me stuff. My name is Ken Coughlin. I'm a Christian apologist coming at you from Trinity Lutheran Church and School in Joppa, Maryland. Thank you for joining us this evening. Unlike most of our shows, you may have already caught on that this is not actually live. This is pre-recorded. I am off tonight, but I want to get an episode out there as well. And looking at the calendar, I decided to do something relatively timely. But before we get into that, let me tell you a little bit about how the show works and how to get your question on a future episode. So the way the show works is that all the topics are viewer-driven, meaning that you all get to ask me a question, and you submit your questions, and we look through them every week, and we pick one that we're going to answer. And the way you get your question to be considered is you go here to trinityjoppa.org/askmestuff. On that page, you will find a form that you can fill out where you can submit your question, and then we look through all of the submissions on there every week, and we pick one. So if you got a question, you want it answered, go ahead, fill out that form. We'd really appreciate it. Also, if you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel yet, please do so. We're trying to get to 2,000 subscribers, and we'd really appreciate it. If you haven't subscribed yet, if you could help us out. And click that subscribe button, click that little bell button, don't miss to get notifications, and don't miss any wonderful content that we have out here on the Trinity Joppa channel. So, all that being said, what is our topic for the night? Well, considering what day it is when this is airing, I thought, should Christians celebrate Halloween would be a very, very timely topic. Now, I am also not in favor of reinventing the wheel. And those of you that have been longtime viewers of our channel may remember that 4 years ago, we did another show that was on this same topic. Before Hey Ask Me Stuff came around, kind of the predecessor to Hey Ask Me Stuff was a show called Trinity Talk Live, which was a very ironic title because at least when it first began, it wasn't actually live. But the pastor at the time wanted me to call it that, so we called it that. It did eventually evolve into being live, and that show started out where it was just almost like a daytime talk show where we put up a whole set in the sanctuary stage, and we'd be having different guests every week and different topics every week, and I'd be doing interviews. And then it evolved gradually over time into being more of just almost like a podcast style talk show between two people, myself and at the time, pastoral assistant Ben Lander. Now, pastoral assistant Ben Lander is no longer pastoral assistant. He is now Pastor Ben Lander up at St. Muncie's Lutheran Church, or St. Andrew's Lutheran Church in Muncie, Pennsylvania. Sorry, Ben, if you're watching that, I messed that up. Anyway, but 4 years ago was kind of the kind of a midpoint here in Trinity Talk Live, where Ben wasn't like on every single week yet, but he was still kind of a regular. And at the time, we didn't have the studio yet, and we were still filming either in the sanctuary or this particular episode I'm talking about. We actually filmed in my small little office downstairs. We set up a little set as best we could, but we really crammed it together like sardines. So anyway, 4 years ago, I think Ben and I did what I felt was a pretty good episode, trying to kind of analyze and show both sides of the discussion of should Christians celebrate Halloween, and of course also sharing what our viewpoints were. And so rather than reinventing the wheel, I decided to re-show the bulk of that episode here tonight as an episode of Hey Ask Me Stuff. Now, when I did go back and rewatch it, as everything that you put out there in the world, you always go back afterwards and say, oh man, I wish I'd said that. And so there's one small point that, well, it was kind of briefly touched on in the episode. I do think it deserves a little bit more attention. And so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to go ahead and show you the episode from 4 years ago. And then at the very end, I'm going to come back and I've got one little thing I'm going to add before we sign off. All right. So hope this is a blessing. See you at the end. Hello and welcome to Trinity Talk Live, water cooler conversation from a Christian perspective. I am Ken Coughlin. That's Ben Lander. We're just foregoing the introductions. If you don't know him by now, watch more episodes of the show. I'll say he's our pastoral assistant here. There, I've done your introduction for you already. First thing you might notice here is that we're on a different set. Ben and I do like each other, but we don't normally spend this amount of time in this close proximity to each other. But we had some scheduling issues with something with normally we shoot in the main sanctuary. We had to move out of there for today's episode. So we're filming on, we kind of gussied up the In the World set a little bit. But one thing with the In the World set is it's a lot tighter quarter. So that's why you see us here in a little bit different. We try to make it look as much like the Trinity Talk Live set as we could, but you are watching Trinity Talk Live, not In the World, just so you know. So what we decided we want to do today, what I decided, I don't know, Ben just kind of agreed to come along for the ride, yeah. Every now and then we'd like to throw out an episode out there just to see, how controversial we can get, and so, hey, what the heck, these are the ones that get views, right? No, seriously, this is a subject. And comments, yeah. And seriously, obviously, this is late October. It is Halloween season, and one of the big points of discussion, I think, within the Christian community this time of year is whether Christians should celebrate Halloween or not. And so we figured we would tackle that subject and, for whatever it's worth, give you our thoughts on it. I will say, and just in the interest of full disclosure right from the get-go, that Ben and I actually kind of do come down on the same side of this issue. But we are going to do our best to fairly represent both. Obviously, we'll give you our insights. You may agree with us, you may disagree with us, but we do want to try to be fair to both sides. And if you disagree with us, feel free, please comment. Write your comment in the comment section here on the YouTube channel. Get a discussion going there. That's perfectly fine. I think that's something maybe, hopefully, as long as it's all in the right spirit, as Christians should exhibit.
Please be kind.
Yeah, basically. He says it more bluntly than I do. Then we invite you all to please go ahead and engage in conversation about this. Agree with this, disagree with this, agree with each other, disagree with each other. But remember, we're all in this together. Pastor Jay says that sometimes, and every time he says that, I can't help but think of High School Musical. I know. All right, so on that note, we're going to move on to our topic of the week. Should Christians celebrate Halloween? And I'm going to start out by making the negative case, so to speak. I don't want to say I'm going to make it as much as I'm going to review and read from some quotes from some resources, some things that I found, some articles of people who are making that case and saying that no, Christians should not celebrate Halloween. And primarily, I'm going to be referring to, this is an article by Elliot Watson. Forgive me, I'm putting on my reading glasses because I printed out my notes in 12-point font, which my eyes do not like 12-point font. So, Elliot Watson is actually a freelance writer and contributor to CBN.com, the Christian Broadcasting Network. Now, I do want to make sure we're clear that on this article, it does indicate from the editor of the Christian Broadcasting Network that the views expressed in the article are the opinion of the author, meaning Elliot Watson, and do not necessarily reflect the views of the Christian Broadcasting Network. So I don't want to paint them with this brush. These are just the views of Elliot Watson. But I did think that for the most part, Mr. Watson gave a pretty good explanation of why people are opposed to Christians celebrating Halloween. And basically it boils down to origins. The origin of the holiday is felt to be pagan. Here's some of what Mr. Watson said. He said the origins of Halloween are Celtic in tradition and have to do with observing the end of summer sacrifices to gods in Druidic tradition. In what is now Britain and France, it was the beginning of the Celtic year, and they believed Samhain, the lord of death, sent evil spirits abroad to attack humans, who could escape only by assuming disguises and looking like evil spirits themselves. Another article I found online mentioned that another way you could possibly escape was by giving treats, yeah. Basically. Now, maybe not the candy we have today, but giving apples or things like that, yeah. Let's see, in the 4th century, Christians attempted to co-opt the holiday by celebrating the lives of faithful Christian saints the day before Halloween. And that that's first I heard. Obviously, today we have All Saints' Day is celebrated the day
November
after.
1st, right.
But I'm not questioning Mr. Watson. He's the historian. He did the historical research more than I did, but he says it was the day before. Says this was a conscious attempt to provide an alternative and refocus the day away from ghouls, goblins, ghosts, witches, and other haunted experiences. He goes on to talk about modern-day Wicca. And he says, Halloween is a real sacred day for those who follow Wicca. In fact, it is one of two high and holy days for them. The Celtic belief of spirits being released is current, along with the worship of Samhain, the Lord of Death. Both are promoted as something to embrace on that day. Again, something else I picked up on another article that I saw that talked about during the Roman Empire, there was a custom of eating or giving away fruit, especially apples, on Halloween. Probably a celebration of the Roman goddess Pomona, to whom gardens and orchards were dedicated. Since the annual feast of Pomona was held on November 1st, the relics of that observance became part of our Halloween celebration. For instance, the familiar tradition of dunking for apples. And I've got links in the show notes to both of these articles, so you can read them in their entirety. But Mr. Watson concludes his piece with the following sentence, and I've got to say, in all candor, I was perfectly fine with everything Mr. Watson was saying up to this point. I thought it was very objective. But then this is the conclusion that he makes. He says, those who celebrate Halloween either are unaware of its roots or are intentionally promoting a world where evil is lauded and viewed as an ultimate power. Intentionally promoting evil. That struck me the wrong way, in the sense that I don't think that just because we have different views on whether or not Halloween should be celebrated, that we should go around and labeling other Christians as you're intentionally, meaning getting inside their head. This is what you're thinking, fellow Christian. You are intending to promote evil. What were your thoughts on some of what we've gone over there so far?
Yeah, I think the whole discussion and kind of this all centers around this whole debate of form versus function. If somebody is celebrating Halloween and to immediately jump to the conclusion that they're intentionally promoting evil kind of glances over that whole concept of form versus function. What I mean by that is you look at something, a symbol today, you look at its form. Is the form itself evil or is it the function that it serves that is evil? You look at, I'm going to go here, this is a controversial episode anyway, but like a swastika. The form itself was used prior to even the Nazis in World War II Germany. But we associate it so strongly now with the evils and the horrors of the Holocaust that it has become a symbol of evil. Am I going to go hang swastikas? No, I'm not going to go do that. But it goes back to the form versus function. To put a more Halloween spin on it, black cats. Black cats are kind of associated with witches and all of these things. And so that's kind of the function that they serve around this time of Halloween. But does that stop us from going to the pet store and picking out a black cat? No. That's just the form that it takes on. So we have to be mindful of the intent behind why we're doing something, and to just immediately assert that anybody who celebrates Halloween is either completely oblivious or they are intentionally promoting evil. It kind of misses that middle ground where we believe, I think, truth really lies in, where judging of the heart. When somebody is celebrating Halloween, are they just celebrating a cultural tradition, or are they actually actively worshiping a pagan deity?
Let me play, and I hate to use this phrase on this episode, but let me play devil's advocate.
Right.
Let me ask you about, like, the swastika example you just gave. Is it possible for a form that was previously used for something else to become so inherently intertwined with a negative meaning that it really can't be used for anything other than that meaning anymore? And if so, is there an argument that Halloween has become intertwined with those pagan practices that it can't be separated?
That's a good question. I
That's
think a
why I
lot of
ask
that
it.
has to do with culture, and culture is constantly shifting. So I would be hesitant to say that there's a point where something reaches that saturation point where it cannot be redeemed, for lack of a better term. You look at the cross. The same reverse happened. The cross in Roman culture was a symbol of death and punishment and ultimate humiliation. And Jesus' death and resurrection turned that symbol into what we use now as Christians, a symbol of life and victory and hope and peace. So I'd be hesitant to say that anything can reach that point where it cannot be redeemed and turned around and used. Again, it's a form, it's a cross, but it's always been God's plan to use that cross to bring about our salvation. And so God can use anything, I think, if we give it over to his hands to bring about his purpose.
Well, and I'll say that for whatever 2 cents I've got on that I think that it's a matter of discernment. whatever the particular symbol is or particular item is and the cultural setting that you're in. You always want to be aware of our environment. It's kind of like if you're going out to if you're out at a restaurant with a recovering alcoholic, do you want to be drinking a whole bunch of alcohol in front of them? Right. And so there's always kind of some awareness of that. And I will say that those who do say that Halloween should not be practiced by Christians generally point to scriptures that have to do with we should not practice paganism. I mean, Leviticus 19:31, do not turn to mediums or necromancers, do not seek them out, and so make yourselves unclean by them. Acts 19:19 is talking about some new converts to Christianity and says, and a number of those who had practiced magic arts brought their books together and burned them in sight of all, and they counted the value of them and found it came to 50,000 pieces of silver. So I guess the question is, if we are going to, if someone does not think that or does not have a problem with Christians celebrating Halloween, then they'd have to respond to that objection. The objection is basically, well, when you're celebrating Halloween, you are essentially violating these scriptures. You're practicing pagan religions. Is that fair? Or if you're practicing or celebrating Halloween, are you practicing pagan religions?
I would say that's not a fair statement. Again, going back to the whole looking at the heart behind it, the intent behind it. Let's look at the definition of worship. Are you worshiping a pagan god by celebrating Halloween? No, not unless you're actively going out. I think we have to look at what we mean by worship. So many times we see, and we kind of get this idea in Christianity it's been out there of, so many things in our world can become idols and idolatry. While that's true, and hear me when I say that, I believe this spiritual realm is true, and we should not get into necromancy and spiritism. I think unless a Christian is going out and holding seances and things like that, that's clearly something that we should avoid. But if they're doing it just, kind of going out and, trunk or treating, for example, something like that, that's not actively worshiping a pagan deity. And going back to this whole, I kind of got on a tangent there about idolatry, and that goes back to form versus function. We look at so many things and we're so scared or leery of things that could be idols that we kind of shut everything out. Okay, well that's good to maybe be better safe than sorry approach. But are there those things that kind of are just form versus function? For example, look at idolatry. Why in the Old Testament is the Old Testament prohibits the creation of graven images, right? So the Israelites were not supposed to create images of any kind. Well, again, there's form and function. That was to prevent them from worshiping those images. So why is there images of cherubim covering the Ark of the Covenant? Why are those images, which were made in the same fashion, why are those ones okay and instructed by God, whereas the golden calf that they ended up worshiping was bad, and they were punished for that? It's the function that they served, not their form. They were formed in the same way. They were smithed with metal and put together in the image of something, cherubim or a calf, but the function was that they were worshiping Yahweh or they were worshiping Baal or other gods.
Yeah, and that when we were kind of first talking about doing this episode, we both you showed me an episode of Lutheran Satire, which is a neat little YouTube channel out there. But they have one. It's called Halloween, How Do We Celebrate? And it's an exchange between two folks. And I'm not going to, again, there'll be a link in the show notes to the actual episode. But summarizing the exchange, there's one of the characters is talking about the fact that he's not going to participate in a Halloween celebration because his daughter would be worshiping pagan gods if he allowed her to go get in a costume and go trick-or-treating. To which one of them says, well, I'm pretty sure your daughter will not actually be worshiping pagan gods if she doesn't believe in them. The response, well, if you do the same things as the pagans before you, you are guilty of worshiping pagan gods, even if it's not coming from your heart. Well, later on, the same individual who's objecting to his daughter participating, be saying that even if it's not in her heart, if she's participating, going through the motions, then she's essentially practicing and worshiping pagan gods. Now he's talking about, shall we say, non-heartfelt Christian worship, and says, if you just go through the same motions as those Christians before you, you're not worshiping the same God they worshiped if it's not coming from your heart. To which point, person number one now kind of wraps it all up and gives the punchline to it. So just to clarify, if I just go through the Christian motions, it doesn't make me a Christian. But if I just go through the pagan motions, then I'm totally a pagan. He says, that's right. That's, and I think that summarizes the response that I would advance, and I think Ben would agree with me, to those who say that by having kids get dressed up in costumes and go out trick-or-treating, that they're actually participating in pagan worship. Well, I don't think there's a single child that I know of in my family or amongst their friends that thinks they are intending to worship any type of pagan god by getting candy from their neighbors. Right. And so it's not in their heart. And so we can't really have that double standard. If we're saying, well, we're not really practicing Christianity unless it's true in our heart, then we're not really practicing a pagan religion unless it's true in our heart as well. And in this case, it's not. Right. So,
and I would
go ahead.
Go back to, well, I'm just going to take off of your show notes. I think going back to, in that Lutheran satire video, they lifted up 1 Corinthians chapter 8. Mm-hmm. And so we kind of have it here. And it says, so then about eating food sacrificed to idols, we know that an idol is nothing at all in the world, and that there's no God but one. For even if there are so-called gods, whether in heaven or on earth, as indeed there are many gods and lords, yet for us there is but one God, the Father, from whom all things came and for whom we live. And there is but one Lord, Jesus Christ, through whom all things came and through whom we live. But not everyone possesses this knowledge. Some people are still so accustomed to idols that when they eat sacrificial food, they think of it as having been sacrificed to a god, and since their conscience is weak, it is defiled. But food does not bring us near to God. We are no worse if we do not eat, and no better if we do. In essence, that's Paul's argument there to the Corinthians, is that, for the sake of good conscience, if that is their conviction not to celebrate Halloween, then I don't want to tell them to go and do that. If that's your conviction to abstain from Halloween, do so. Follow your conviction. But for us, for those who experience the freedom of Christ, and that's not to say that one way is particularly better than the other, but for the freedom that we experience in Christ, to know that an idol is nothing, as Paul is saying, that it all goes back to, who it is that we worship, how we are worshiping them, and, even using those things in a way, kind of redeeming them and using them for God. For example, like we talked about, a trunk or treat or something that can direct people to God. How we do that in Halloween, maybe that's a whole other episode of Trinity Talk Live. But there are ways, I think, that we can redeem the culture, because Christ didn't call us just to be hermits and to abstain from everything, but he called us to be salt and light, to actively transform the culture.
Yeah, and I'm throwing a bunch of stuff in the show notes, so obviously we have a limited amount of time that we can spend in an episode, so please go ahead and do check out the resources that we put down there on both sides. But one of them is a satirical piece that was done by an acquaintance of mine. A lot of us Christian apologists, we tend to kind of support each other in the online community, and so I don't know him personally, but we have some joint interest, and we've come together in that regard. Stephen Bedard, and one of the things he kind of gave again, satirically titled 5 Reasons Why Halloween is of the Devil, and I'm not going to go through all of them, but one of them in particular does, I think, kind of respond to Elliot Watson's point that we kind of brought up at the very beginning, where he kind of, again, tongue-in-cheek, says, everyone who participates in Halloween are doing it for the express purpose of participating in occult practices and not for any joy that they experience. Again, tongue firmly in cheek. And that's kind of what it comes down to, is that when you have reactions like that by Mr. Watson, who kind of says that anybody who's celebrating Halloween, there's only 2 alternatives. Either they don't know the history of it, or they're intentionally promoting evil. Mr. Bedard's kind of pointing out a third possibility, or they're just having fun. They're not trying to advocate pagan religions. They're just going out to have a good time. And there's certainly nothing wrong with Christians having fun. And I will tell you another thing I didn't put in the notes here, that I saw a comment when I was going through all of this, getting ready. Somebody else pointed out, just in the comment section of one of these articles, that this actually can be getting an opportunity. I mean, seriously, here we have an opportunity where people are going to be coming to our door, our neighbors that maybe we wouldn't have met otherwise, that now we can actually meet and who knows, maybe start a relationship with. So there's an opportunity in the Halloween celebrations as well, I think. So any other closing thoughts of anything that we haven't talked about?
I also like the fifth kind of point of his satire there. Said, God certainly does not want us to have fun. We should be spending our time wearing sackcloth, but not as a costume, and throwing ashes on our head.
But doesn't that, I mean, it's satire, satirical, but it also points out, it's interesting because obviously putting something on a la costume, a la sackcloth, is not in itself the problem, because when people were putting on sackcloth, it was to express mourning or something like that. Whereas, when these pagan practices, if you look historically, people are putting on costumes to try to avoid getting caught by demons. Is that why children are wearing costumes today? Are they putting them on to avoid getting caught by demons? No. Then they're not engaging in pagan practices. Right. So, all right. That's all I got. I'm assuming that's all you got. Yep. So, hopefully there's something valuable. I know that Ben and I, like I said, we both kind of come down on one side here, but I'm hoping that we were able to fairly represent both sides of this debate and give you some food for thought. All right. So I promised at the beginning that I had one other thought I wanted to share at the end. And there was one point in that episode where I made the comment of something along the lines of, hey, if you were going out to dinner with someone that you know is a recovering alcoholic, you wouldn't want to be drinking alcohol in front of them, even though you might, and I know some Christians will disagree with me on this point, but let's assume for the sake of argument that you do have the freedom to consume alcohol, obviously not to become intoxicated, not to abuse it. The mere fact that you have that freedom doesn't mean that you should be exercising that freedom in front of somebody who, you could be subjecting to temptation. For an addiction that they've been facing. And I didn't elaborate on that too much, but it actually does tie into another response that I see sometimes from folks who believe that Christians shouldn't be celebrating Halloween. And so I want to give you kind of the scriptural basis for that. That wasn't just an example I pulled out of my head. It comes from the book of Romans, not explicitly alcoholism, but you'll see what or alcohol consumption, I should say, but you'll see what I'm getting at here. I'm going to read for you first Romans chapter 14, and I'm going to particularly talk about the verses 1 through 6 and 13 through 18, and then I'll kind of explain how I see this sometimes used as an argument for why Christians shouldn't celebrate Halloween, and I'll give you my response to it. It says this: accept the one whose faith is weak, without quarreling over disputable matters. One person's faith allows him to eat anything, but another whose faith is weak eats only vegetables. The one who eats everything must not treat with contempt the one who does not. And the one who does not eat everything must not judge the one who does, for God has accepted them. Who are you to judge someone else's servant? To their own master servants stand or fall, and they will stand, for the Lord is able to make them stand. One person considers one day more sacred than another considers every day alike. Each of them should be fully convinced in their own mind. Whoever regards one day as special does so to the Lord. Whoever eats meat does so to the Lord, for they give thanks to God. And whoever abstains does so to the Lord and gives thanks to God. Therefore, and this is now skipping ahead to verse 13 here. Therefore, let us stop passing judgment on one another. Instead, make up your mind not to put any stumbling block or obstacle in the way of a brother or sister. I am convinced, being fully persuaded in the Lord Jesus, that nothing is unclean in itself. But if anyone regards something as unclean, then for that person it is unclean. If your brother or sister is distressed because of what you eat, you are no longer acting in love. Do not by your eating destroy someone for whom Christ died. Therefore, do not let what you know is good be spoken of as evil. For the kingdom of God is not a matter of eating and drinking, but of righteousness, peace, and joy in the Holy Spirit. Because anyone who serves Christ in this way is pleasing to God and receives human approval. All right. why do I bring that up, and why did I feel like I wanted to elaborate more on that? The reason was this. If you look at what Paul is getting at, that passage was kind of the point of my example during the actual the 4 year ago podcast, where I said, look, if somebody's a recovering alcoholic, it's not the loving thing to do to be drinking alcohol in front of them, even if you are allowed to do so. All right, it's not the loving thing to do, and you shouldn't do it. And another point Paul makes is, don't let what's good be looked upon as if it's evil, because what you do when you do that is, you remember, we're all ambassadors of Christ, right? And so are we casting Christ in a bad light? Are we creating a bad impression of Christianity as being unloving when people see us doing things like that? And so the analogy to the Halloween question goes like this. And it would be somebody who might concede the bulk of what Ben and I talked about and say, okay, fine, I get it. You're not technically worshiping. And so, you're in your freedom, you're technically allowed to do that. But the outside world is looking at Christians doing this, and it's casting Jesus in a bad light, because the outside world doesn't understand the freedom we have in Christ, and sees Christians basically engaging in pagan worship. And it makes it think like, Christians are hypocrites, or think pagan worship's okay, and it confuses the message of Christianity. It would be no different than if a Christian had a statue of Buddha in their living room. It might cause some confusion, with people who come to visit. They say, well, wait a minute, I thought Jesus Christ, your Lord and Savior, why do you have a statue of the Buddha on your mantle? So I'm very sympathetic to that argument. Here's why I don't personally agree with it. And I do think that it is something we as Christians need to keep in mind. Our ultimate responsibility is always to kind of serve as ambassadors to Jesus, and to cast Christ in the best possible light, and not create confusion when we shouldn't, not create stumbling blocks, all right, when we shouldn't. Is that really the case in regard to Halloween? And I say no, for a lot of the same reasons that we talked about between Ben and I, is that when the outside world sees children getting dressed up as princesses, or Power Rangers, or Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, and going around and saying trick or treat and getting candy, is the immediate thought that comes to their mind, oh, those children are engaging in pagan worship. No, I think it's those children like sugar and want to get as much of it as they possibly can, and they like dressing up and playing make-believe. All right, that's the message that it sends. Now, do I think that there arguably could be things that Christians people might engage in on Halloween that kind of cross that line and start to look more like pagan rituals? Like I mentioned, I can't remember if it was I or Ben mentioned on the show, well, we shouldn't go out engaging in seances, all right, for example. So I do believe that line is there. I just think that when you draw that line at saying you shouldn't engage in anything having to do with Halloween, then I think you're throwing out the baby with the bathwater, and I think you're taking it a bit too far. Bobbing for apples. If someone sees someone bobbing for apples, they don't think they're worshiping some kind of pagan goddess. Okay, they think they're bobbing for apples and they're just having fun at a party. So I don't think it communicates the message. I don't think all of the most foundational traditions, secular traditions with Halloween, communicate this pagan worship message that is the concern. But if that was the case, then I would be definitely on board with that, and I would definitely sympathize with that. I just don't think that's the case. So, and again, like I think Ben said in the episode, it's like, if your convictions come down differently, then God bless you. I don't think we as Christians should be criticizing. Just like this passage, one definite implication I think of the passages I just read is that if you as a Christian don't think that you should be engaging in celebrating Halloween, then you shouldn't. All right, then for you, it is a problem. And because it's a matter of your heart and what's going on in your heart. And so if you think that by doing it, you'd be engaging in pagan practices, then don't do it, because then you're kind of betraying a conviction of your heart about dedicating yourself to the Lord. I don't have that belief in my heart. Well, not universally, like I just said. I'm open to the fact that, yes, there are certain things we shouldn't do. And so I'd be in the same boat as you with regard to engaging in a seance, for example. All right. I would not think, oh, Halloween's a great night to go out in the middle of a cemetery and have a seance. No, that's something that I do think crosses the line. And so that if I engaged in that, whether or not it really was sinful, it would be sin for me. I think it really is sinful. But anyway. All right, so hopefully that clears that up. I do want to say thank you very much for joining us this and every week. And again, we will be back again live next week, Tuesday night at 6:30. If you do have any comments, questions, if you agree with me, disagree with me, I know we couldn't do the live on-air interaction tonight, but throw your comments down there in the comment section. We'd love to hear from you. And again, one last reminder here, if you do want to get your question on a future episode of Hey, Ask Me Stuff, go to this website that's on your screen right now, trinityjoppa.org/askmestuff, fill out the form, submit your question, and you never know, you might get to see it on a future episode. And again, we're trying to get to 2,000 subscribers, so if you haven't subscribed to the YouTube channel yet, you'd be doing us a great favor if you did so. Tell your friends about it, share this video, like this video, comment below, and come back again next week at 6:30 on Tuesday. See you then. God bless.